See, cameras are getting lighter and lighter, and it's getting harder and harder to get a stable shot without actually using a stabilizer. Things like a tripod, a dolly, a Steadicam, or a gimbal. But what if you're shooting something where you just don't have access to something like that? Like you're shooting a vlog, or you're shooting something on the fly and you're just using what's in your camera bag. What do? Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Felicia, and today we're going to talk about how to get a smooth shot without actually using a gimbal. One of the things you can do is adding weight to your camera. The smaller and lighter that a camera is, the harder it is to keep steady while tracking movement or walking. This is usually because your hands are on the body of the camera and there's a lot more shake depending on how heavy the camera is. So adding weight to your camera can be a good way to combat that. You could use battery grips, handles, shoulder rigs. There's a multitude of different things that you could use to make your camera that little bit heavier and easier to maneuver. It seems counterintuitive, but it actually works. I like to use my GorillaPod as handles. I bend up each leg and I use them as a handle on either side of the camera. This gives me much more maneuverability over the camera, and my hands are removed from the actual body itself. Camera shake is especially evident on phones. Phones are almost the lightest camera you can get, and often the image stabilization inside a phone isn't really up to scratch. An easy way to combat this would be using a tripod to remove your hands from the body of the phone itself and give you a little bit more control. It's not perfect, but it's a good method. You can also use a phone gimbal, and I would highly recommend using a phone gimbal if you are going to shoot on a phone. But hey, this video is about not using a gimbal, so try use a tripod first. As well as adding weight, you could think about supporting items. Much like handles, you could use your camera strap as a third point of contact to the camera. If you stretch a taut between your neck and the camera, you have a third point of contact to the camera and therefore have a much more stable image. If you don't actually own a camera strap, you can also use a shoelace or a length of string. Just make sure you pad out the neck area so you don't hurt yourself. And there are also other things you could use to cradle the camera. In larger rigs, you'll see people tend to use something called a saddle or a cine saddle, and it's pretty much a glorified beanbag. Not even kidding. But you could just as easily use a duffel bag and stuff it with pillows. But the weight of your camera isn't enough. You also need to think about your stance and the way you move. Camera operators and Steadicam operators tend to have a very distinct way of moving. Kind of looks like a mix between a ninja and having to go to the bathroom. But seriously, they tend to use their whole foot rather than just taking a regular step. Sometimes this is easier to do when you're in sneakers or when you're barefoot. It just depends on where you're shooting. Depending on what you're shooting, you could also think about shooting in different frame rates. If you're in a PAL region, you could think about shooting 50 or 100 frames per second. And if you're in an NTSC region, you could think about shooting 60 or 120 frames per second. Shooting in slow motion can soften all of your movements, so using this in conjunction with the other tips, you should be able to get a better result. It may also be worth considering other settings on your camera, like your lens choice and your frame size. I would definitely recommend shooting any handheld tracking or moving shots on a wider lens. That way your field of view is much wider and you'll have a much more easy time making it stable. Whereas if you're shooting on a longer lens or a tighter lens, your field of view is very small and it's very hard to keep it smooth. Same thing goes with mobile phones. Don't ever use the digital zoom on a mobile phone unless you really have to. It never looks good. Also, shoot in the biggest frame size you can on your particular camera. That means in post, if you have to do any further image stabilization, your image is not going to crop in too much. If you guys would like a tutorial on warp stabilization in post, let me know in the comments down below. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you got something out of it, and if you did and you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a big fat thumbs up. It really does help. And if you would like to see more of my face and learn a little bit more about filmmaking in the process, remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next Sunday.